Guys, if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel and hit the alert button so you get updates. And also, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This podcast episode is brought to you by Defense Soap. Defend what you have built. Save 15% with the code Marc the Shark MMA Show, used by all Jiu-Jitsu and MMA athletes to prevent skin infections. This podcast is also brought to you by Audible. Go to www.audibletrial.com/MMA Show, and you get a free audiobook when you sign up for a 30-day trial. This episode is also brought to you by HostGator. Save 60% on your web hosting needs by using the promo code Marc the Shark MMA Show. Again, save 60% on your web hosting needs with HostGator. This podcast episode is also brought to you by Ritordo Family Books. If you're interested in great books for your children to read, get books by Christina Ritordo. And if you're interested in action, thriller, suspense books, you can get The Cabal, The Saga Begins, or fantasy books like Marcus the Vampire, both written by your host, Marc the Shark Ritordo. Again, go to www.ritortofamilybooks.com. Also, do not forget to go to the Marc the Shark MMA Show podcast website, the shop for our merchandise. We got t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, hats, and even mugs. Anything you can want with the Marc the Shark MMA Show podcast name on it. And also, please do not forget to go to our website where you can make a donation to support the podcast. All you have to do is click on the donation button. Follow the channel, and if you have an Amazon Prime account, you can subscribe for free. And before we get started with today's show, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. Today's particular episode is sponsored by the Renzo Gracie Academy of Northern Valley. If you use the promo code Marc the Shark MMA Show, you can get a free week of training. You can call them. The number is 201-344-2052. And then we're also sponsored by Ritordo Family Books. When you go out there, you can check out the books that I've written, including Marcus the Vampire and The Cabal, the Saga Begins, and also my daughter's book. She's got a brand new book out there called A Little Bit Louder. It's the second book in her series called the Invisible Girl series. And then last but not least, we're also sponsored today by Audible. If you go to www.audibletrial.com/MMA Show, you will get a free audiobook when you sign up for a 30-day trial. You can even pick up my audio version book of my book called The Cabal Saga Begins, or my daughter's book, The Invisible Girl. All right, guys. Now, today's episode is going to be about a particular jiu-jitsu instructor that I know personally. And I've been lucky to find what I like to call the gem of jiu-jitsu. Everybody talks about the Blue Basement at the Renzo Gracie Academy in New York City. They may talk about the academy with Marcelo Garcia or even Team Altos in California. But today I want to talk about a gentleman. His name is Carlo Massaro. He's the head instructor and owner of the Renzo Gracie Academy of Northern Valley. Today, here he is. How you doing today, Professor?
I'm doing great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Good. Yep, so we're live now, and I wanted you to give people out there listening and watching the show a little background on yourself. Like, how did you get into the martial arts?
I started Taekwondo when I was about 19 years old in the early 90s. Okay. And I've always wanted to do it since I was a kid, and I just never got to do it as a kid. So after high school, I decided to do it, and I jumped into it. And did that for many years until jiu-jitsu came along. But yeah, martial arts have always interested me since I've been a kid.
Okay. Is there any particular reason how you got interested? Was it Bruce Lee or Chuck Norris?
I love Chuck Norris. I guess as a kid, I always watched The Octagon and, all the Chuck Norris movies. I love Bruce Lee. Ninja movies were big, I was
Yeah,
sure
yeah, I
my
remember
age. I
those,
grew up
right?
in the 80s. It was all about ninjas. Black Belt magazine. So interestingly enough, I was introduced to judo at 8 years old. But as an 8-year-old, I was like, there are no punches and kicks. I don't want to do this. Looking back, I wish I had stuck with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got into Taekwondo, stuck with it. About 97, I got my black belt, at which time I was already doing jiu-jitsu. I was a blue belt in jiu-jitsu by then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now, how did you find out about jiu-jitsu? Did you watch it on pay-per-view event on like the first UFC, or did you get involved beforehand?
Yeah, no, I watched the first UFC, and I remember watching it. I didn't watch it live. I watched it I remember hearing about it the next day at my Taekwondo school. And I was training Taekwondo. I think I was already probably a green belt. This is 93.
Okay.
And everyone's talking about this thing that was on pay-per-view, the UFC, and they're like, some Brazilian street wrestler won the whole thing. We're like, Brazilian street wrestler? What are you talking about? Was there punching and kicking? And then people started talking about Royce Gracie. And I wound up watching it, and I was like, what the heck is going on here? This is not the way we learned how to fight. This is not what we're learning. And after that, I kept watching the UFCs, and I met a friend of mine. My friend Guy was training with someone who was under Royce Gracie. It was David Adib and Alex Wilkie. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you
I
know
those
them, right?
guys.
Yeah, so Alex, David Adib, Guy Valella, they were the first guys. We're talking like 94. Like they were already starting jiu-jitsu. And, back, if you don't know anything, as you know, if somebody knows side control, mount, back, and basic armbar or choke, like they're going to dominate you. And I remember rolling. I think at that time I rolled, I was probably green or blue or red belt in Taekwondo. And I remember rolling with these guys and just feeling helpless. And I was like, this is unbelievable. I have to learn how to do this. And I'm sure you felt the same thing. The best selling point for jiu-jitsu is feeling it. And since then, I started training. I was taking the trip down to Central Jersey, but it was a little bit too much a trip. And then I went to Renzo's in like 97, 98 and just stuck with it. Just jumped into jiu-jitsu 100%.
Now, I also know you've done several MMA fights. What made you decide to get into MMA? Like, were you like a purple belt, brown belt? Did you just want to test yourself? Like, what made you decide to go into MMA? Especially back then, there was like zero money in it. You know?
No money. I think the most I won was $800 for an 8-man tournament. Back then it was. I remember Dan Marigliotta had Bama, Bayside Academy of Martial Arts, and they had a lot of the shoot fighting, which was open hand to the face, grappling on the ground, knees, kicks. And since I already had a striking background, and at the time in 97, I think right before I went to Renzo's, I had my first shoot fight, and I won.
Okay.
And then after that, I did a few more shoot fights. I did 7 shoot fights, and I won all 7. And then Dan Marigliotta had a 205-pound man under, 205-pound and under 8-man tournament. It was MMA, and I signed up for that, and I won it. But what got me into it, what interested me, there, as you know, back then, you were around then, there weren't a lot of tournaments. It was the only place you could test yourself. I think Grappler's Quest might have just been starting. So it was really the old days. Like it was like the Wild West of jiu-jitsu and MMA. But I remember wanting to test myself, and I was happy I did it.
Yeah, I remember those Bama fights. I think, when did you do it? Like around 2000? Because I think that's when I probably moved up. Because I used to watch a couple of them.
Yeah,
like around 97, 98.
Yeah, I did my first in 97, and the card I fought on, Matt and Nick Serra, were purple belts. I remember I was a blue belt. I didn't know them.
Oh, so I actually watched you then.
Yeah, 97 to like 99, 2000 were all shoot fights. And I was fortunate enough to win them all using jiu-jitsu with a little bit of striking. But yeah, by 2000, I think that's when Big Dan had that 205-pound and under 8-man tournament. And a friend of mine convinced me. He's like, "Man, you should really go in there." I'm like, "Really? You think so?" He's like, "Do it." He's like, "You're gonna win." He's like, because at the time I was a decent blue belt at Renzo's, but you remember then, like at Renzo's, the level of jiu-jitsu was top in the country, except for there was West Coast and there was East Coast, and those were pretty much the hubs of jiu-jitsu. And anyone training at Renzo's at the time like had such a massive advantage over a lot of the people who weren't training under a legitimate instructor. There were legitimate instructors, obviously. You had David Adiv, Alex Wilkie. So there were some jiu-jitsu guys. But, yeah, in Renzo's, I didn't fight any of those guys. I made sure I didn't fight my old teammates. But, it was just a totally different experience.
Now, so you were a blue belt when you
so in 2000, I'm a blue belt. Big Dan opens that 8-man tournament. I enter. I was 178. And it was 205 and under. This is before the days of weight cutting. This is when you used to fight several times in one night. And the way he did the tournament, was you fought one time, I think it was in September. And then if you won that, you'd fight two times in December if you won the whole thing. So it was 2 times in one night. So September I won. I broke my leg in the fight, but don't know how. It wasn't anything that would prevent me from finishing the fight. So I finished the fight. I won. And my leg healed. I came back a couple months later, and I had 2 more fights that night, and I won the whole thing. But, yeah, that was pretty much the introduction to it for me.
Okay. And then at what point did you decide to become a jiu-jitsu instructor?
Well, I was kind of like teaching privates around, I got my brown belt in 2005. So before that, I was teaching some people, and I was teaching privates at karate schools and teaching little classes, jiu-jitsu karate schools. When jiu-jitsu was, if you were a brown belt in 2005, there weren't too many other brown belts around or black belts. So I would teach on the side for income and teach privates. But after I went back to college, I finished college, and I was either going to get into like museum curatorship, like because I collect antique weapons and arms, or teach jiu-jitsu. Yeah. So I decided, you know what? I've already got the qualifications for jiu-jitsu. The chances of making a good living are there, and it's something I would have enjoyed. So, with Renzo's blessing, I opened the school in 2008 as a black belt, and we've been open ever since.
Okay. Now, I have to ask this question because you train with Renzo, and you train with probably one of the best coaches, not just in jiu-jitsu, but in MMA, John Danaher.
Yeah.
How is it training with those guys? I mean,
yeah, I mean, in the old days, Renzo, when I first got to Renzo's, John Danaher was a blue belt, and so was I. And John and I became pretty good friends. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, he surpassed everybody. I think him and Sean Williams got their black belts around 2001. I got my black belt in 2007. John was pretty much considered an instructor there by the time he's purple belt. He was always innovative. But training under Renzo was very interesting in the old days. I remember Gracie used to come in. All the killers from Gracie Baja used to visit. And so we had a good influx of talent coming from Brazil and even Japan. I don't know if you remember TK Kosaka. He used to come in Renzo's. Yeah. So I rolled a lot with Renzo, and that was always great because Renzo would roll with the students. It was always a good team. It was always a good group of guys. And I think it was probably around 2005 when I was a brown belt. But John was already starting to develop like a killer team. He had some black belts that were very, very good. And from about brown belt on, I think Renzo was teaching a little bit less, and I was mostly making the day. I was mostly training with John in his day class from brown belt on. But I can't say enough good things about their instruction, Renzo and John.
And what makes John tick? I mean, his creativity is like off the charts. And I got his leg lock DVD, the one that you're in before they redid it.
Mm-hmm.
So I still have the one with you in it.
Yep.
I just look at it, and it's like a totally different system. It's like learning another martial art. That those leg entanglements, just bizarre.
Yeah, and
You know?
when you first see them, if you're an old school guy like me, they're somewhat new. All these leg rides and entanglements and inversions, but just like anything, just like judo, just like wrestling, anything that's got a combative outlet, like a realistic outlet, will evolve over time. In my opinion, the martial arts that do not have that live outlet tend to devolve over time. But John has always been very intelligent, and I happen to say he's one of the smartest guys I know. We've always discussed ideas, but it was always interesting to watch John come up with things. He would study video. He reverse engineered a lot of judo Olympic throws and takedowns and started incorporating it. And he used to teach quite literally. I think before his knee and hip were bad, he used to teach like 7 or 8 privates a day. And then if he's not teaching privates, he was on YouTube. Even back then, when he had YouTube where he was watching instructionals. So his intelligence combined with his education, he's a very smart guy. He's got a very clear critical thinking pattern. I think it was just the right guy in the right place with the right amount of input and knowledge, and he created it all from scratch.
Yeah, it's very remarkable, and I think I see a little bit of the way not necessarily the way he thinks, but his understanding and a little bit of you. I don't know if you ever saw my comment. I've seen your YouTube channel,
Mm-hmm.
and I see your commentary when you're rolling with the students. And it's very the way you comment on the way your interactions are during the roll, I find pretty sophisticated.
Thank you.
Which I attribute, I guess, to your training with Renzo and John, because you seem to have a very deeper understanding of the techniques. Now, do you find that when you started to teach, that actually helped you make you a better jiu-jitsu practitioner?
100%. And this is why I like all of our purple belt, brown belt on, you should be teaching a little bit. Even if you're not teaching a class, you should be helping out white belts, should be helping out blue belts, passing on the knowledge. Renzo used to say it: if you don't teach, you will forget the moves. So by teaching, you're systematically teaching yourself why the moves work, and you might not even have thought about it. You might have been like, "Oh, I didn't know I knew that." So you're starting to explain the concepts to yourself. And every time you teach, you're going through a movement pattern. You're understanding the movement pattern. So I firmly believe that by the time you're black belt, you should know how to teach. And I believe that teaching absolutely makes you a lot better. You've seen it in the people who assist in our classes, like even the kids' classes. They assist. Yep. They're just going over fundamentals, a lot of the solid fundamentals with the kids. But after months, their jiu-jitsu gets up because they're understanding the concepts and explaining them. So I really believe that teaching is crucial by the time you're purple brown belt up.
Yeah. Now, how do you find, like, because I know occasionally you roll with the current Death Squad members and so forth, like Gordon Ryan, Gary Tonin, and occasionally I guess you roll with Jake Shields. He drops by. How does it feel to roll around with those guys, those world-class athletes?
They're killers. I mean, and all of those guys are literally among the best in the world. They all have phenomenal games, very modern games, and the beauty is that I got the feel. I've been there since before anyone knew who they were, and you get to see their games evolve. You get to feel their games evolve. We're talking about a dedicated group of guys, especially in like the likes of like Gordon, Nicky, Gary, all like the core members that they're there like twice a day, 6-7 days a week, dedicated hours and hours and hours. And it's just, if you've ever read any book like The Talent Code or Talent is Overrated, they're pretty much doing what they talk about. They're just putting in repetition. So yeah, these guys are absolutely the real deal, as you can imagine. And rolling with them is always fun. It's always a learning experience, no matter what happens. Getting smashed, felt like you did good, no matter what. It's definitely an experience.
Okay. Now, how did you get to train with George St. Pierre? I got to know this. Like, how did you get the opportunity to go there and become a part of his training team during your prime?
Yeah, I was fortunate. George started coming to Renzo's probably in early 2000, but I didn't really meet him, or like he would come infrequently. And then by the time he was a purple belt, I remember seeing him there, and he was already kind of known. Like he was starting up his career. He was already in the UFC, and this is, I think we're talking maybe 2005, 2004. At the time, we were similar in weight. I was probably about 178. George was probably 183, 185. And we used to train together. And we were both purple belts. And we just hit it off. By the time 2011 came around, I think he was fighting Jake Shields. I already had a pretty good relationship with George. And, I was under John and Renzo. And myself and my friend Marc Cerrone and, a couple other guys that were up there at Renzo's. John has great instructors there and great people like Brian Glick and that George always trained with. I think at the time I started helping with the Shields camp around 2011. I came up a little bit and helped him with that, but it wasn't until the Carlos Condit camp. When George fought Carlos Condit, I think that was 2012, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. John kind of said, look, we got to get on this. This is a tough opponent. And he assembled a crew. It was myself. It was like Harry St. Ledger, he's now at Jackson's, but he's a black belt in judo, good black belt in jiu-jitsu. At the time, he was a purple belt. Myself, my friend Marc, and John assembled a crew. And we were able to make it up there every week and help George train and be part of the camp. And we'd be there for his jiu-jitsu classes. And it just seemed something that it worked. John and Faraz believe very much in volume, and very smart training, not just killing yourself for no reason. And we would follow a method, and we'd listen to what John said. And then, since that was successful, every camp after we've been up, it was Nick Diaz, Johnny Hendricks, obviously Bisping. So we were up for all the camps, and I consider myself very fortunate to have been there and helped out with that.
How is it rolling with him?
George is very good. Well, first of all, you'll see he's a legit black belt. He's a very good black belt. He can train gi and no gi, and obviously he almost exclusively focuses on gi because of where his career was. But George is very explosive. He's just naturally always been that way. He's strong and he's technical. He's a guy you can't really sweep. It's very hard to sweep. Very hard to stand up on, obviously. He controls the action. But, and even now, he's starting to get a really good leg lock game. George is a pleasure to roll with and train with. Him and I always have hard rolls because we've been training for, 15 years together. We always have good rolls together. We have a lot of fun.
A lot of competitive rolls, or?
Yeah, George and I are usually competitive to some degree when we roll in intensity. We flow roll too, but we know each other's games, and sometimes we turn it up on each other, and it's fun. He's a great guy, but George can do either. He can go light too. He's a really great training partner.
Yeah, he's got to be probably one of the most athletic guys you ever met, right?
He's ridiculously athletic. Yeah, I remember even saw his 23andMe DNA profile, and it said that, like, on there it says you possess the DNA profile or muscle profile of very high powered athletes. Like, it actually said that. He showed it to me. I was like, well, that makes sense. Like, he's just got the genetics for someone who has very explosive power. So he's definitely a freak. He's got a long reach, his work ethic, his positive mindset, and obviously his athleticism. But John Danaher's pointed this out. He's not the most athletic guy that ever went in the UFC. There are some freaks in MMA. George is a very good athlete, but a lot of it was his system, his shoot box system that he developed. Obviously, his working with John, working with the crew, working with Faraz. Faraz is underrated. He's amazing. He just had everything at the right place.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, who's your out of the guys out there now that are fighting in, let's say, the UFC? Like, who's your favorite MMA fighter?
Well, George was my favorite for a while, and believe it or not, I've always been a Nick Diaz fan. I've always liked Diaz and Shields and them, but I had to help George for Diaz, but I like Diaz. I've always liked his style. Damian Maia I've always liked because he has a very good system for jiu-jitsu, even though I don't know if he's retired now, if he's still fighting. But yeah, Damian Maia has always impressed me, and George. But yeah, there's the talent. Just like I said earlier with jiu-jitsu, it's getting better and better. And MMA has got some incredible talent in it, in UFC and in other venues as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of like watching an MMA fight, do you prefer to see fights end in submission, being that you're a jiu-jitsu guy, or you prefer guys that can mix it up with the strikes and the wrestling and the jiu-jitsu?
Well, to be a modern mixed martial artist, you better be pretty darn good at the major areas of MMA, which would be obviously free movement, striking phase, and shooting, clinch phase, fence wrestling, and ground grappling. And I do like guys who can mix it up, but obviously, with my jiu-jitsu background, I love to see grappling. I love to see jiu-jitsu. I think that it could be one of the safest ways to win a fight if you have a good system in place. I've always been disappointed when I saw fighters who had the advantage on the ground, who decided not to go on the ground because maybe they had a striking coach that talked them into striking. And when they lose under circumstances like that, I get disappointed. But yeah, so I've always had a favor for grapplers, obviously.
I find myself that same way. I prefer to see a fight end in submission.
Yeah. Let's face it, MMA, you have to be an educated fan to fully appreciate what's going on. And I've always said it's like being a musician or a conductor. And if you listen to an orchestra and you're that trained, you're going to hear things that maybe the layperson doesn't hear. I think it's the same with MMA. Most fans are very educated now. In the early days, nobody was. They used to scream all sorts of things at the TV or tell them to stand up. But yeah, it's very interesting to see how the sport has evolved. That's what I would say.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, I got one more question for you. Are you watching tonight's fight?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Now, who do you think is going to win between John Jones and Dominic Reyes?
Hard to say. I don't like to call fights because I think there are so many variables that I wouldn't want to be a matchmaker. I wouldn't want to be an odds maker. But Jones is tough dude, man. I don't know. I don't want to call it, but I'm looking forward to it. I would usually give it a little advantage to Jones. If he's on. He's very difficult to deal with.
Yeah. He's one of those people what I call athletic freaks. Like he advanced.
Again, going back to genetics. Even his siblings are professional athletes.
Yeah.
I think his brother is like a professional football player. Like he's just And he's obviously a very intelligent man. Like he's very creative, and he's really unbelievable fighter.
Yeah, it should be a good fight, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Who else is on the card? I know Caitlin. My friend Caitlin's fighting. Valentina Shevchenko.
Yes. I was actually watching the countdown. She's actually fighting for the belt, I believe.
She's what?
She's fighting for the belt.
Yes. Yeah. I've worked with Caitlin before in the past. Like she's working with John now. Marc Henry and the crew. She's very, very talented. But it's a hard fight. Like Valentina is obviously champion for a reason.
Yeah. I was watching the UFC countdown, and I'm like, because to be honest, I never heard of her. And
Caitlin?
I'm like, I've never heard of her. I heard of obviously the champ and so forth. Yeah. And I guess she must have been fighting on a lot of the prelims. I tend to miss the prelims. I was watching her. I'm like, she's training in Danaher now. So I was pretty impressed.
She started with my friend Jamal Patterson, who's a Henzo black belt, and she's training in the city now. I've worked with her a lot in the past. Obviously, Marc Henry, Ricardo Almeida, like she's got a really good crew of people around her. Her boyfriend is like an Olympic alternate wrestler, like very high.
Oh, really? Yeah, I knew he did MMA.
Yeah, and he's good at jiu-jitsu too. So she's got a good crew of people around her. John's been working with her for several months now. She's not to be underrated. She's got very, very good jiu-jitsu, extremely good. I think she's still a brown belt. But great wrestling, great striking, good work ethic. But all that being said, she's got a very tough opponent tonight.
Yeah. She's probably one of the best, like not just for female. I think like Joe Rogan says, I think she's probably one of the best fighters out there. She's very well rounded.
That's hard for me too because I'm friends with Caitlin, but I've always been a Valentina Shevchenko fan. I really think she's very, very well rounded, very skilled in like her judo, her striking, her submission game. But it's always tough to watch when your friends are fighting. I obviously always worried, but it's going to be interesting. I'm very excited to watch tonight.
Do you think she's going to take it to the ground, or?
I don't know. I haven't discussed the game plan with them. Even if I did, I couldn't say it.
Try to get some insider tips so I could call the bookie.
I mean, I hope so. I hope so because I think that's where personally the advantage lies. I think Caitlin's very good at everything, but to me, her jiu-jitsu really stands out. If she really pushes her jiu-jitsu, I really think she can really. There's always a chance if she gets around your back or gets on top that she can control the fight and finish easily.
All right. Well, that's it for today.
Thank you.
I appreciate having you on the show, Professor.
Yep.
Again, everybody, check out his academy, Renzo Gracie Academy of Northern Valley, New Jersey, located in Northvale, New Jersey. And if you guys are watching this in podcast form, keep listening because there's more content to follow. For you guys watching it live on Twitch, show's over. See you next week.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me. See you in class.
It's a pleasure.
Take care.